Ministry of Horror, back from another little delay of a week. Good excuse though. There's a good excuse for the delay. So people who've followed the channel, followed me on socials or whatnot, will know that last year went ahead and got married, and part of that was getting married in Las Vegas, in America, and then we went on a road trip for a month across the United States from Vegas through to Florida via a number of different states. It was an incredible trip, but of course it then meant a bit of a delay in the Ministry of Horror. I haven't gone ahead and got married again, but as part of the planning for that, we basically kind of set up this whole theme of Vegas and Valentine's. Because of having a destination wedding, it meant that a lot of our closest family and friends, nearest and dearest, weren't able to make the trip to Las Vegas. Whether that's health, whether that's finances, availability. It just wasn't possible for a lot of people, especially on my side. So we had this idea of doing a party in the UK, and rather than coming back from a incredibly expensive but amazing trip and then straight away going into planning and paying for a UK party, we thought we'll give ourselves a little bit of breathing room. That breathing room being Christmas, which is so it's expense after expense. But now, touch wood, no immediate expenses for a little while, just a little while. Probably be updates on that in the coming shows. But for the near future, no further massive expenses, other than of course horror films. But yeah, we have had this past weekend the UK party, the Valentine's party, and it was incredible. What that had meant is that I just was not really available or in the headspace to do a podcast. A lot of my week had been spent doing a bit of editing, so very fortunate for myself. My wife is incredible at doing event planning and planning in general, and so she dealt with everything for the Vegas party, and obviously everything for the wedding as well. I can't take any credit there. But my input, or my output, I suppose, actually, I should say, for the UK party was to do a bit of editing. During our trip in America, I had got some really cool drone footage, if I do say so myself, and also general footage, using it's called a DJI Osmo Pocket 2. Not quite as cool as the Pocket 3, but that was a hell of a lot more money. I used that to get a lot of footage of us as we were sort of driving around, so the various landscapes we were covering, along with phone footage and just various little bits to, even some still photos to kind of document our time in America, not just the wedding, but, stag and hen do's, along with traveling around the Hoover Dam and the Grand Canyon, and then also our honeymoon. And so, yeah, my week was sort of dominated with editing that. So no real horror films during that time. I did get to the cinema, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. No real gaming. And in terms of reading, I've been making a nice little dent into Joe Hill's King Sorrow. People don't know, Joe Hill is the eldest, I believe, the eldest son of Stephen King, author of Nosferatu, Horns, a few other ones, Heart-Shaped Box. And King Sorrow is his new book. It's a bit of a fantasy horror type book. So far it's pretty good. But it's massive. It's a doorstop book. It's like 760 pages. I'm about 230 into it. So, we're looking at about just over a quarter, I say, something like that. Not quite a third from the looks of it. But that's kind of where I'm at in that book, book reading side of things. But yeah, the party was awesome. It did mean a lot of work Saturday day to get it prepared, which then meant by the time of the party I was in agony because pre-existing foot issues, and then we had the joy of taking it all down. But what I must say is a huge thanks. Not just to everyone that came and enjoyed themselves and whatnot, and we had a great time partying with you, but everyone that helped us with our wedding in America, in terms of gifts and whatnot. It really meant that we were able to actually live our dream. doing the wedding and the honeymoon in the first place, but also some really good close family friends and family who helped out setting up the hall, because the hall looked incredible. Again, the planning for that was all down to my wife, but her vision really took off. Everyone commented on how good it was, and it's really, I think, led to a bit of an uptick in interest in that location. This unassuming village hall has now, got a lot of eyes on it as to what can be used with that space, and that is really all thanks to the wife and her vision. And so, yeah, huge thanks to everyone that helped out with the building up of that, and also the taking it down. We really had a huge task to deal with Sunday morning. I wasn't that much help because I could barely walk. I did what I could, but I wasn't up there up the ladders taking all the fairy lights down. But no, it was able to be done in quite a good short amount of time in comparison to the work that was needed. So, I don't imagine any of them listen to the Ministry of Horror, but of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't say a huge thank you to those for their incredible hard work. It's very, very much appreciated. So, horror. We haven't really talked much horror in this 7 minutes, other than the horror it takes to make a wedding film or a honeymoon film. But it was fun, actually. I do enjoy editing when I actually can be asked to do any. I did get to the cinema. I watched a film called Send Help, new Sam Raimi film starring Rachel McAdams. I had to think there for a second. Rachel McAdams and Dylan. What's his name? Dylan O'Brien. Watched that in the cinema. I also watched on Shudder a film called Birdeater, which I wouldn't necessarily call that a horror, to be honest. And also a film on Arrow Player, because I've had Arrow Player for a little while, and I rarely think to watch things on there, because a lot of the classics I either already own or are on Shudder. But there are a lot of things on there that are worth your time. Was what I watched worth your time? We'll get to that a bit later on, but what I watched was Clive Barker's Underworld, also known as Transmutations. And that led me to thinking, you know what, we haven't, correct me if I'm wrong, long-time listeners, we haven't actually done an episode yet on Clive Barker. One of the masters of horror literature, along with cinematic horror, with adaptations of his books and short stories, along with adaptations he himself has directed or produced directly. So we're going to talk about a handful of the cinematic outputs, either directed by Clive Barker or adapting his work. Not all of them. We're not going to go into Hellraiser, but some of the maybe lesser known or lesser appreciated entries under his name. So outside of that, what else was I about to say? Yes, so exciting news. We are going to have either next week or, well, actually probably next week. I need to confirm the dates, but the embargo lifts for early reviews of Dolly. Now, I have had an invite to go to an advanced screening. I don't know whether my seat has been secured, because it's kind of how it works. You get invited to show your interest. Limited seats are available. If you are interested, and if they're able to secure it, you then get a seat to go to a screening. So I have declared my interest after receiving the invite. But in the interim, I have been sent an advanced screener for the film. Now, Dolly is a film that we talked about a little while ago. The artwork had appeared online. The trailer dropped about 2 weeks ago. I don't know if we talked about the trailer on this show, but I watched the trailer, and I think I might have commented on it on the Discord. So search for the Ministry of Horror on Discord. Shout out for a link. We can put links on socials, of course. But the trailer looks freaking terrifying, if I do say so myself. It's shot on, I think, 16mm film. So it has that real grimy look to it, really sort of classic 70s horror Texas Chainsaw, tourist trap-esque tone to it, but it looks grisly. It's a woman gets kidnapped by this enormous person with a porcelain doll type mask who takes them to be her child, almost like their play doll. It looks gnarly. So I'm also quite scared to watch it. But either way, I'm hoping to go to the advanced screening, but I think that is in early March. It hits cinemas March 3rd, I believe. So I think it might even be the premiere that had an invite to. I don't know. I'm excited either way. But the embargo lifts next Monday, 23rd, I think. So we will have a review of that on as a bonus on the channel, on YouTube and Spotify, Apple Podcasts. So that's exciting. But anyway, we've got tons to talk about. Let's jump straight into the horror news. All from blooddisgusting.com. There you go. That's their shout out. John Squires writes, on Friday, February 13th, there's been 8 new horror films released. After Good Boy and Presence told haunted house tales from unique perspectives, a dog and a ghost respectively, we now have a haunted house movie from the house's point of view. The House Was Not Hungry Then is available on digital now. The unique Scottish horror movie revolves around an abandoned house in the Scottish countryside that holds a terrible secret. Day after day, a man posing as a real estate agent lures visitors inside, and one by one they disappear. One night, a young woman searching for her estranged father takes refuge inside, but soon begins to feel she's not alone. As she gets closer to learning the truth about her father, she explores the dark interior and eavesdrops on the disturbing relationship between the house and its caretaker. Writer-director Harry Aspinwall makes his feature debut on the film, which stars Bobby Rainsbury, Clive Russell, and Bill Patterson. So I never got around to watching Presence, but Good Boy, big fan of that. Good Boy definitely was a good boy. Dogs and horror, as long as they don't get hurt, awesome. The House Was Not Hungry Then, it sounds interesting enough. Being told from the house's perspective, not entirely sure how that works. I guess, how would that differentiate itself from Presence, with Presence being told from the ghost's perspective? Yeah, I haven't watched the trailer for this yet, but it sounds intriguing. I just don't know how accurately you can portray it being told from a house's perspective when the house is... I don't know. But it sounds interesting. Next, the psychological sci-fi horror slow burner Honey Bunch from Dusty Mancinelli and Madeline Sims Fewer is now streaming exclusively on Shudder in the US. The film follows Diana, who wakes up from a coma with fragmented memories. Her husband takes her to a facility deep in the wilderness, but she can't remember why. As her memories begin to creep back in, so do some unwelcome sinister truths about her marriage. Grace Glowacki, Ben Petrie, Jason Isaacs, Kate Dickey, India Brown, and Julia Riching star. Psychological horror. I'm a bit wishy-washy with psychological horror because sometimes it can just be an excuse to go, oh, wait a minute, the killer all along was actually a split personality of this character, or you were actually doing all these things and blah 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 blah. And I get that is kind of part and parcel of it, psychological horror being that is all of this in the character's head, or is this a projection of, are we seeing them as an unreliable narrator? It can work sometimes, but it can be a bit hackneyed other times. So, I don't know. So it's an exclusive to Shudder, which, boy, mixed, as always with the Shudder. It's a mixed bag. It's a great service for, obviously, horror output, but it's not as if it's known for smashing it out the park with Shudder exclusives on a regular basis. Next up, based on the hit horror video game The Mortuary Assistant, is now playing only in select theatres via Epic Pictures. You'll find it streaming on Shudder beginning March 27. The Mortuary Assistant follows newly certified mortician Rebecca Owens, who accepts a night shift at a mortuary, embalming bodies alone after hours. As disturbing events escalate, Rebecca uncovers demonic rituals, the dark secrets of her enigmatic mentor, and her own buried trauma, racing to survive the night before her body becomes a vessel for possession. Willa Holland and Paul Sparks star, with Mark Steger as the Mimic. Mortuary Assistant creator Brian Clark co-wrote the script with Tracy Beebe. Jeremiah Kipp directs. Jeremiah Kipp did Slapface, which was... I remember reviewing that a few years ago. Meh. So, Mortuary Assistant, I've never played the game. Game looks really scary. I know it's a horror channel. What am I talking about? But it looks like one of those sort of jump heavy focus games. I don't know if it's really good from a narrative perspective. It looks a bit kind of single location is the impression that I've had, but I've never tried it. The trailer for the Mortuary Assistant does look suitably creepy, I have to say, but I'm sure I saw on social media the other day that the Rotten Tomatoes scores, or the critic Rotten Tomatoes scores, have already dropped, and it's like a 40%. You can never really go on that as a be all end all in terms of does that mean it's bad? You need to make your own mind up. But I haven't heard viewer scores on that as of yet. I'm interested to watch it, but will it land on Shudder over here March 27th, or will we in the UK have a delayed release, as sometimes is the case? Not too sure yet, but I am interested to watch this one when at a suitable price point. Next up, A Quiet Night Shift gets explosive and gross outways for Joe Keery and Georgina Campbell in the sci-fi horror comedy Cold Storage. The film is now playing only in theatres. In Cold Storage, Tea Cake and Naomi, two young employees of a self-storage company built on the site of an old US military base, have their wildest night shift ever when a parasitic fungus escapes from the lowest sublevel of the base, where it was sealed by the government decades before. As the temperature rises underground, this highly contagious and rapidly mutating microorganism multiplies. God, the blood disgusting page keeps crashing. Multiplies and unleashes its brain controlling, body bursting terrors on the facility's inhabitants, human and otherwise. Yeah, I caught the trailer for this at the cinema when I saw Sent Help. It does look good. I mean, Joe Keery's always, his charming as the what's his name? I always forget it, and it's a very obvious name in Stranger Things. Dustin, and it's gone. My brain is mush. Steve Harrington. He's an endearing character, endearing actor, and Georgina Campbell is the star of Barbarians and also The Watchers. I can't remember too much of The Watchers. I thought it was fine. Yeah, it's a good cast, and of course Liam Neeson. Yeah, I'm gonna have to give it a go. The follow-up featured to Jurassic World Rebirth and presence from esteemed writer David Cope, based on Cope's novel of the same name, directed by Johnny Campbell. Well, there you go. Decent people behind it. Next, a teenage dream becomes a rock star's nightmare in Sweetness, which looks like a modern riff on Misery through a Gen Z lens. The thriller is available on VOD via Saban Films. In Sweetness, when a superfan learns that her rock star idol is spiraling into addiction, she makes it her mission to save him, whether he wants her help or not. But when her desperate plans spiral out of control, she kidnaps him in a delusional attempt to fix him. What begins as compassion turns into captivity as she locks him away in the name of love. I have seen the trailer for this one, and whenever you see, like, that's probably a millennial mindset, but whenever you see like a Gen Z focused thing, you think, oh, Gen Z, 6-7 bullshit and all that stuff and all that crap they spout, which I know is old man shouts at clouds, and it happens with every generation. You look at the next generation coming up, and think, idiots. But it's not really the case, because the Generation X would have looked at millennials and thought, idiots. It's just the natural course of things. But this does look like it would be quite fun, actually. Misery for a modern generation isn't really a bad thing, I don't think. It's a classic tale. So I'm interested to look at how well that works. How far it goes, because Misery, of course, is notable for the hobbling scene. Have they got a version of that? Next, from Popeye the Slayer Man, which was actually surprisingly not terrible. Popeye the Slayer Man producer Jeff Miller. The Twisted Serial Killer universe kicks off with Ted Bundy. No, that's not a typo. And it's now available on VOD outlets. Ted Bundy introduces the illegitimate son of serial killer Ted Bundy. Raised around rabbits, the crazed heir goes on a killing spree after a documentary crew shows up at his house. Oh, Ted Bunny, I've reread that. I've read that wrong. Ted Bundy introduces the illegitimate son of serial killer Ted Bundy. Raised around rabbits makes more sense now, which is a stupid sentence to say. Genre legend Dee Wallace stars alongside Diana Roman, Brett Satterwhite, Trent Avenir, Zaina Wyatt, and Brian Palacios as Ted Bunny. And the next one in the universe is Jeffrey Dahmer. I mean, it's one of those things where it's natural for messed up things in history to influence horror entries. But doing a, I don't know, it just seems a bit silly. I can't imagine it would be good, to be honest. Twisted serial killer universe, taking people that did actually commit heinous crimes and doing like a bit of a piss take on it. I don't know. I mean, you know, obviously certain serial killers in history will have influenced certain killers and stories in literature or films or whatever. And of course, you have adaptations. Like I did start watching, which I need to continue actually. I've just been busy. The John Wayne Gacy series, which is now on ITVX. And so far, 2 episodes in, it is quite good. But the reason why it's quite good so far, and the reason why an adaptation of these stories works better, is you're not focusing on it being a slash. You're not focusing on particular kills, because that's a bit disrespectful to the actual victims and the families of the victims. It's more so on the investigation leading to the arrest. But this is just, I don't know, it just seems a bit like poor taste, to be honest. So, from the mind of Christopher Polaha comes his directorial debut, Mimics, a genre-bending blend of horror, fun, and romance that's now playing in theatres for Friday the 13th. Here's the logline. Down on his luck, impressionist Sam Reinhold makes a pact with Fergus, a wicked, strings-attached puppet that holds the promise to propel Sam to stardom, unleashing a nightmare that threatens the safety of those he holds dear. Filmed in Reno, Nevada, Mimic stars Nashville-based Latina country singer Moria, Saturday Night Live icon Chris Parnell, Stephen Tobolowsky, and Polana himself. Polaha himself. God, Jesus Christ. I need more coffee. I was drawn to this unique story that explores fame and the supernatural, while managing to be at turns funny, romantic, and spooky, says Polaha. The movie is a romp. Working on both sides of the camera to tell this story was an extremely gratifying experience. Yeah. I mean, again, we've talked a number of times on this show about horror comedy. It has to work best if it's focusing slightly more on one of those elements. From the sounds of this, where it's horror, fun, and romance, I would imagine it's a romantic comedy with horror tones. Because otherwise, if you're going full horror with comedy, it has to balance. You have to get the recipe has to work. You can't have too much of one ingredient at the expense of another. Because you know where's the taste come from? It could be presented well, but be a bit too salty. It could taste great, but there's just something missing off the plate. To finish it off. You can tell I've been watching a lot of Hell's Kitchen, on Prime. Check out Prime. Blah blah blah. So I'm not too familiar with anyone other than Chris Parnell, but interesting. It's all just part of the show, right? The latest horror movie to turn a haunted attraction into a real-life murder party is The Haunted Forest, which is now available on VOD. In Haunted Forest, when Zach, a high school senior obsessed with all things horror and Halloween, goes to work at his cousin's famous Haunted Forest attraction, a series of real-life killings makes him question his devotion to the world of the macabre. Indie horror newcomer Keith Boynton wrote and directed The Haunted Forest. There's not much more on the page other than that, but the trailer does appear to have someone with a very cinematic accurate appearance of Jason. They've got a look of like the Friday the 13th remake / Freddy vs. Jason appearance. Not sure they're allowed to do that. I mean, it's just a hockey mask, but yeah, it looks very much like Jason. There we go. Moving on in the horror news, wrestling meets horror in Mr. Reset and the Society of Turnbuckle and Bone series. Alex DiVincenzo writes, the godlike personalities of professional wrestling meet the psychological dread of horror cinema in Mr. Reset and the Society of Turnbuckle and Bone. Vinny Pacifico, who's ex-Ring of Honor, don't know. I know Ring of Honor, I don't know that guy's name, stars alongside Jed Kazuski, Rob Kimball, name rings a bell, Nick Stubile, Carly Pacifico, probably a relation to Vinny, Bobby Fish. Now we know Bobby Fish from the Undisputed Era. And Nick McNeil, aka Percy Watson, ex-NXT. Vaguely remember Percy Watson. Set in a shadowy world where secret societies orchestrate both glory and ruin, Mr. Reset and the Society of Turnbuckle and Bone reimagines professional wrestling as a fever dream, one part psychological thriller, one part live action anime, and all subversive spectacle. With a razor sharp sense of humour and moments of absurdity, the series gleefully lampoons the spectacle of fame, even as it plunges viewers into dread. Masked figures move into the periphery, rituals blur the line between ambition and nightmare, and every obsession comes at a blood curdling price. It goes on from there. It is quite a long, log line, blurb for it. I mean, it feels very much like they'd seen the success of was it called Dark Match? Yeah, Dark Match, which was on Shudder, and that was that was actually decent. I was surprisingly all right. I mean, this one, it kind of sounds like they're going for a bit of a mixed bag. And it's directed by Kazuchi and Daniel Healy. Now, Daniel Healy, I'm pretty sure that's Austin Aries. Now, the reason why it's worth mentioning this story is long-time listeners, blah, blah, blah. Long-time listeners may know that I used to co-host at one point the Ministry of Slam. I was a long-time listener of the show, friend of the hosts, had a few guest spots, started doing the Ministry of Horror as a kind of a sister show. And then also did some co-hosting on the show after they had a bit of a change of hosts for a while. So there's always a bit of that horror crossover there with wrestling, and that's happened a number of times over the years. We've had instances with Chucky appearing in horror in wrestling, which brings us to another little story. And I'm going to have to trim down some of these. I've got quite a few stories for the news left, but we don't need to go into all of them. So Alex DiVincenzo writes up about Jennifer Tilly, teases that more Chucky and Tiffany are in the works. Although Chucky was cancelled in 2024 after 3 seasons, the cast and crew remain optimistic that it's not the last that we'll see of the killer doll. Jennifer Tilly, who plays both Chucky's muse, Tiffany Valentine, and a fictionalised version of herself in the franchise, has confirmed that a new Chucky project is in the works. The television series just ended, but I know for a fact there is more Chucky and Tiffany in the works, Tilly told E.T. The gruesome twosome. It remains to be seen what form the latest installment will take. Another feature, perhaps, but Chucky's a rare horror icon whose original continuity remains intact. Don Mancini has been the driving creative force behind the franchise since it began in 1988, shepherding it from theatrical to direct-to-video to television, even with the Hollywood remake in between. Following the show's cancellation, Mancini posted, "The Chucky franchise has always prioritized story continuity across different media for decades. You will see your favorites again." Tilly can currently be seen in Season 3 of Paramount Plus's School Spirits, which I've heard is meant to be alright. Never got around to watching it. Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that has to be applauded, right? Is that the Chucky series has kept has kept up with its continuity. It hasn't gotten to a point where we've had our original timeline and then we've deviated off with a sequel that's ignoring parts 3 onwards, and then a remake, and then we've got a new sequel that's direct to the first film. Obviously I'm mentioning Halloween here because that's a very famous example of that. But I do also think that that's probably a little bit to its detriment. I certainly feel that it jumped the shark with Seed of Chucky, because we then went into the world of meta, where Jennifer Tilly, who played Tiffany, was then appearing as herself. Now, I get that that's a way to have her appear because she was incredibly popular as a young man in Bride of Chucky, and her character died because she became the doll. And a way to then feature her again would be, okay, well, the physical embodiment of Tiffany has now died and the spirit has been transferred into a doll, of course. But Jennifer Tilly is also an actress who just happens to look very similar to the character of Tiffany. I've never been a big fan of meta. When meta is done well, like Wes Craven's New Nightmare, great. But in that world, I felt it jumped the shark also because it was just a weird film, with is it Billy Boyd that did the voice of Glenn or Glenda? That whole storyline, progressive, sure, I get that. From an entertaining standpoint, I've seen it once, didn't really like it at all. I've had no interest in rewatching it. Although I do have the Chucky collection somewhere back there. And then we had the move to direct to video. It was all right, but quality-wise, it was definitely a big step down from the first 4 films, right? And then moving into the series, I liked what they were going for in season 1. I don't think it was a home run. And then it just kept getting more and more convoluted with all of the various Chuckies. That was a part of the whole curse of Chucky, or cult of Chucky, I should say. It just gets so convoluted that while, yes, being faithful and accommodating to your long-time fans, you are constantly pigeonholing it and alienating yourself from new fans. You have to, with sequels, have a bit of a way where it could be an entry point for someone new. And the way that Scream films work is, yes, you can get the general gist. You don't have to have seen all the prior ones. You can get the general gist from the dialogue that, okay, well, I know that this is a sequel, so I know that this sort of thing's happened before. And I'm generally going to pick up that, they've encountered X amount of previous attempts on their lives or whatever. There's going to be some form of dialogue to give you some establishment of where things are, 7 installments down the line. But when you've got this sort of such a long-running convoluted continuity, you can't keep explaining that to a simplified degree in each entry without it just becoming an info dump. So then, if you don't then do that, you then have people joining, going like, oh, there's a new Chucky film. I know Chucky, that's the Killer Doll. And going into it, a new entry, let's say, and then thinking, what's going on here? And I feel that that's probably what was maybe to a detriment to the series. As I mentioned, I dropped off in Series 2. I don't think we've ever had Series 3 in the UK for whatever reason, or not that I'm aware of. But while Series 1 was initially quite a good entry point to here's a new character, they come across the Chucky doll, and then we've expanded the mythology by bringing it in, I think that works to an extent, but you then end up with a lot of assumed knowledge on the vast legacy of the series. I don't necessarily think that I don't think it should continue, but I do think some form of soft reboot would work best, or bring in Chucky back, maybe with Jennifer Tilly, but moving into a different direction. We leave in the past, I don't know. I don't want to piss off Chucky fans by saying I'll ignore, the long-term legacy characters, because obviously it is great to have, returning actors back, but I just remember like people being in massive car crashes at the end of season 1 or explosions, and you think, oh wow, they've killed them off, and then they're back because they barrel rolled out at the last minute. It's just a bit cheesy. It is a little bit cheesy, a little bit soap opera, if I'm being honest. And now I'm going to get crap from Uber fans. Okay, let's just do 2 more bits of horror news. So, one of the things in the Discord from earlier on today, long-time listener Eddie had asked if I could talk about the new The Bride, the new film adaptation type thing of The Bride of Frankenstein. Well, we have some news, and we can talk about that as well. So, written by Megan Navarro, The Bride and Frankenstein's monster are made for each other on new Valentine's Day e-cards. Still seeking the perfect treat for your partner in crime this Valentine's Day? Maggie Gyllenhaal's The Bride has you covered with exclusive new Valentine's Day e-cards for your favourite monster. It's ride or die for lovers Frankenstein's monster, played by Christian Bale, and the Bride of Frankenstein, Jessie Buckley, both in the upcoming film, and the 5 new V-Day cards below. The iconoclastic take on the classic horror story hits theatres and IMAX on March 6th via Warner Bros. In the upcoming film, a lonely Frankenstein travels to 1930s Chicago to ask groundbreaking scientist Dr. Euphoronius, Annette Bening, to create a new companion for him. The two revive a murdered young woman, and the bride is born. What ensues is beyond what either of them imagined: murder, possession, a wild and radical cultural movement, and outlaw lovers in a wild and combustible romance. The film also stars Peter Skarsgård, Academy Award nominee Jake Gyllenhaal, and Oscar winner Penelope Cruz. Maggie Gyllenhaal directs from her own screenplay and produces alongside Oscar nominee Emma Tillinger-Koskov, Talia Kleinhandler, and Osnat Handelsman Karen. The Bride is rated R for strong, bloody, violent content, sexual content, nudity, and language. So, I don't know what to think about The Bride. I don't feel personally hyped to watch it. But on one hand, it does look very unique. It's going for a bit of a art house, maybe dark comedy-esque dramatic with horror tones approach to the Bride story. Now, the Bride of Frankenstein is one of the most famous universal horrors in history. I personally think it's a little bit overrated. I think Frankenstein is great. I think The Bride of Frankenstein, great direct continuation of Frankenstein, but The Bride really only features in the last 5 minutes of the film. Iconic imagery, but I do think it's a bit boring, I'll be honest. This new take is going for like a very much a Bonnie and Clyde approach. It's got this kind of mobster feel. It's got this, the Frankenstein's monster, who seems to be called Frankenstein in this, which I think must have just been done on purpose to rage bait, nerds like me. It kind of he has a bit of a Herman monster look to him, and you know, I do wonder if this whole Bonnie and Clyde thing sort of looks like it's maybe going for the Joker or Joker Folie à Deux approach. I haven't actually seen Joker 2, so I can't comment, but I know it got slated. I wasn't that interested in watching a musical Joker film. So I wonder if it's going for that sort of stylized approach and whether that will work. I don't know. But my hype level isn't massive. I've seen a couple of trailers, and the stylistic approach to it, while I commend for being unique, I don't necessarily feel at this stage that it is what I'm looking for in a horror film or an art house type film. But if you're a fan, let me know in the socials. Hit up Discord, hit up, comment sections and all that jazz. And then finally in the horror news, Zach Krieger had carte blanche to do whatever he wanted with Resident Evil, says executive producer. Alex DiMincenzo writes, Zach Krieger will follow up his global hit Weapons with Resident Evil, a decidedly fresh take on the long-running franchise. Constantine Film CEO Oliver Bourbon tells Deadline that the new film is far away from everything that is connected to Resident Evil, only because Zach Krieger has his own style. When it came to entrusting Resident Evil with a new voice, Bourbon admits it was a no-brainer to give Krieger carte blanche to do whatever he wanted to do with that IP. He adds, with Resident Evil, we have had an incredible journey with one of the most successful international IPs of more than $1 billion in box office for many years, and now we are creating something new, not just a new story idea, but to allow a new generation to take the IP into their own hands and form something different. These statements echo previous comments made by Krieger, who remarked, I consider Resident Evil an original thing, and I think you will too when you see it. The filmmaker also stated, I'm definitely not trying to be completely obedient to the lore of the games. I'm trying to tell a story that just feels authentic to the experience you get when you play the games. Directed by Krieger from a script he co-wrote with Shay Hatton, Resident Evil opens in theaters on September 18 via Sony. Austin Abrams, Paul Walter Hauser, Zach Cherry, Callie Rice, and Jono Wilson star. I have faith in Zach Krieger. Thoroughly enjoyed Barbarian. Thoroughly enjoyed Weapons. Thoroughly enjoyed both his his feature films so far. When you're doing an adaptation of a property like Resident Evil, and I'm a big Resident Evil game fan, got my pre-order for Requiem in, of course. Really enjoyed, the 4 remake, the 2 remake, the 1 remake from many years ago. 5 was all right. 6 was crap. Village was very good. 7 I didn't finish. Mud Monsters bored me a little bit, to be honest, but it looked great and it was, had some great scares in it. But point being, big Resident Evil fan for a long time. When you're taking a fresh take on an adaptation like this, I don't know, man, because it's like, is that what people want? But I do. It's such a hard thing because the Resident Evil films, the original film series, had very little, from what I've seen. I couldn't be asked for them, to be honest. Had very little to do with the games, and when it did look, from what I've seen, that they were adapting characters from the games, it looked a bit fan servicey. Speaking of fan servicey, Welcome to Raccoon City, I did think was a very dumb but fun one-off watch film. It's the sort of film that's like a 5 out of 10. Not memorable, but okay. They tried to adapt the characters. Some not very well, like Leon. Others, I think Claire, Jill, I think it might have been Claire, a bit better. But, overall, a very forgettable film, but tried, I guess. Doing it where it's not echoing really anything from the game, you then sort of have to wonder, why is it called Resident Evil then? If we're doing an adaptation that is more so focusing on the experience you have of the game, as opposed to potentially, we don't know at this stage, but potentially any characters or settings from the game, then you do have to wonder, okay, it's kind of potentially a misuse of the Resident Evil IP. Now, I'm only basing this assumption on what we've read so far. As I say, I have faith in Zach Cregger, but I do hope for a new Resident Evil film that, yes, it's scary, great, but it also, I just think it has to have, if it's a fresh take on the Spencer Mansion, or if it's a fresh take on the infestation of Raccoon City or the destruction of Raccoon City, sure, but have something in there as the basis which can be related back to the games, because otherwise it's Resident Evil only in name, and that's not really something that I think is hype worthy, to be honest. That is it for the horror news. Let's jump into some reviews. So first up, doodly-doo, I watched on Shudder recently Birdeater. Birdeater is an Australian psychological thriller film written and directed by Jack Clark and Jim Weir in their directorial debuts. So, as with all the horror reviews on the show, we'll talk about the highs, lows, a bit about the plot, and I'll give you my score out of 10. So, a group of privileged young men gather for Louis' bachelor party in a rural location one night. Louis invited his fiancée Irene and one of his friends, Louis invites his fiancée Irene, and one of his friends, Charlie, invites his fiancée Grace to make Irene feel more comfortable. As time goes on, it becomes apparent that there are serious flaws in Louis' relationship with Irene. So this, it's not horror, as mentioned. There's a psychological thriller. I watched it because there'd been a little bit of a slew of additions to the Shudder app, which is quite rare in the last few months. A number of them are older films, like An Asian Ghost Story Parts 1 to 3, a couple of films called Swallow or Swallowed, which come out in the last few years, not seen them, and then Birdeater, which I did think was newer, but 2003 apparently. And the synopsis for it sounded kind of interesting. It does have that indie drama comedy tone throughout a good chunk of it. There's a few moments of tense dialogue between Dylan and Louis, but there's quite a good moment in a scene where, during this tense dialogue, where Irene, who's very, very sort of sheltered, very sort of, inside herself, just isn't really very outgoing, where she sort of talks a bit about her relationship with Louis and how, one of the guys is talking about how he dates girls, he dates guys, he doesn't think there's just one person for you out there, you just find what you enjoy out of people. And she says, well, that doesn't really work, I mean, how would that work for us? Because, I need Louis, You know, I'm not okay when Louis isn't here. You know, I have to take a pill when he's not here. She's very dependent on Louis to the extent where she is taking drugs. It doesn't really go into what those actual drugs are, but it highlights that, okay, he's essentially doping his girlfriend, is essentially almost grooming his girlfriend or his fiance. A weird dynamic there. And as the film goes on, we get some more weird, trippy moments of drugs and booze on this stag do, or whatever the Australians call a stag, buck. It's a buck party or something like that. Which then leads to a bit of a flashback of their dynamic. It doesn't necessarily explain 100% their dynamic, um, mm, sort of, but yeah, it's an odd film. It's performed well. I'll give it that. I just do think that the tone is a little bit of a mishmash. It's definitely going for this indie drama type feel, and it doesn't really latch on enough to those uncomfortable moments, I don't think. I'm going to give it 5.5 out of 10. There are positives here, but overall, I think it is a little bit of a missed opportunity. We're going to move on to the film that I was quite surprised to see because I'd never heard of it on Arrow Player. It's called Transmutations, but I saw it as Clive Barker's Underworld. Oh boy. Okay. So the plot. When high-class hooker Nicole is kidnapped from her brothel, rich businessman Hugo Motherskill hires her ex-lover Roy Bain to find her. This is directed by George Pavlo, written by Clive Barker and James Kaplan, starring Denholm Elliott, Stephen Burkoff, and Larry Lamb. That's right, what geezer Larry Lamb. Larry Lamb with weird black dyed hair with red streaks in it. It's a very weird looking film. Okay, so I don't really know how to describe this film. The score in it is decent, but we ultimately open up in this high-end brothel where you've got multiple people of esteem and different nationalities, you know, like Arab princes, being treated to fine wine and luxurious ladies. And this woman Nicole is in like almost like bridal gear in her bed with her arms crossed across her chest and going to sleep. It's very strange. And these masked individuals break in to kidnap her, with one of them keeping watch. And the one keeping watch, it's quite clear that he's a little bit ragey. He's a little bit roided up, perhaps. But when his ski mask comes off, he's got bright red eyes, almost like fangs, long crazy white hair, and almost sort of claws. And there's this awful fight scene because the fighting in this is bad. It then leads to this businessman Hugo hiring Roy Bain to look into it, but it's very clear that the people at the brothel won't talk about what actually happened. What are they trying to protect? And then the people at the brothel are seen talking to Hugo Motherskill. What's going on there? Are they in cahoots? What's the purpose of this? And Roy Bain's investigation leads him to what's the doctor's name? Dr. Savary, Denholm Elliott, who's doing horrible experiments that are disfiguring people who now live underground. It's your typical story of the people that look like scary monsters. Well, they're actually the good guys. Think what was then sort of done a bit later on in Nightbreed. There's not really much uber horror in this. Like the makeup effects for the mutated are very 80s. The music is alright, but there's entertainment, but more so from a bad perspective. Like it is not very good. I was going to give it 6 out of 10, but it's really a 4.5 out of 10 for Underworld Transmutation. I don't really know what you can say that's good about it. Cheesy, poor action, cheesy. And then finally on the reviews, I went to the cinema to watch Send Help, the 2026 American survival horror thriller produced and directed by Sam Raimi, written by Mark Swift and Damien Shannon, starring Rachel McAdams and Dylan O'Brien as an employee and her boss, respectively, who become stranded on a deserted island after a plane crash and attempt to survive while tension rises between them. So, we are following Linda Little, which is Rachel McAdams' character, who is a bit kooky, a bit odd. No one really seems to like her, but it's not for any outward reason. Like, she seems very pleasant enough, but just a bit, she works hard. She's very knowledgeable. The business runs well, kind of because of her work, and people take credit for it. And Dylan O'Brien is Bradley, who becomes the new boss. Bradley is very much, he's like, it's clear that he has an eye for the ladies, even though he has a fiancée. And he has overlooked Linda for the job promotion to give someone that he was in a fraternity with. So it's a bit of a lads' club. They're all basically dicks to Linda. During a flight that she is being brought along to, just as a little bit of a, smooth things over, a flight to Thailand, huge turbulence hits, rips a huge hole in the plane. It's quite, violent in that moment, leading to a crash, which has them on the island, with Dylan O'Brien's character, Bradley, injured and begrudgingly accepting help from Linda, who is loving this because she's a huge fan of the TV show Survivor, which is a bit of a joke at her expense earlier on in the film. So anyway, that's kind of your general setup for this film. First off, the highlight of this film is the acting. The leads in this, they are excellent. I mean, Dylan O'Brien is effortlessly quite funny. Not at the point of making it a comedy, but just his reaction to some of the things with Rachel McAdams is very, very good. And he is also at times a little bit endearing, even though his character is an arse. And Rachel McAdams portrays a very lovable Linda Little, who is also a little bit unhinged as the film progresses. In terms of horror, there's a couple of moments of violence, a couple of moments of gore. There's good moments of tension build up. The score in this is pretty good. I do like the way that the film generally went. The finale, I'm not entirely sure if the finale was trying to lead up to elements of it being a bit of a dream, perhaps. But I wasn't entirely sure what I thought of the finale, if I thought it was truly effective, an effective way to end the film. I guess my only negative that I could say for Send Help is the Sam Raimi CGI. So what I mean by that is I don't know if it is a particular company that he uses for the CGI. I don't know if it's a self-made thing for CGI. I certainly don't think they use Industrial Light and Magic. Can't see initially anywhere, who did the CGI. But, it's part of the reason why I could never get on board with Drag Me to Hell. Drag Me to Hell, very popular Sam Raimi horror film. The CGI in it is just cartoonish. And I get that's part of his shtick. Like, Evil Dead, it went with what it could with the budget. Evil Dead 2, it hammed things up a little bit more. It was still good, still, freaky and whatnot, but it was a little bit more slapstick and cartoonish. And as we've gone into the world of CGI becoming more of a focal point, I couldn't get on with the CGI and Drag Me to Hell because it's just too cartoonish, really. And that CGI also followed through into Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, which was, it's like a Marvel horror film because it's got Sam Raimi on board. And there was moments in that, that had some freaky moments, like the guy from the Thunderbolts, whose name I can't remember because I don't really know the Thunderbolts, his head imploding on itself. There are good moments in this where you will kind of cringe, but there's a bit of a ghost scene, like a nightmare, I should say. It's not a supernatural film. There's also a moment with a boar attack. They're both very good, but the CGI just doesn't it's not convincing. And in this day and age, a lot of films do have CGI, which is CGI, but just looks better. So, yeah, I do think that the finale of the film and the kind of cartoon-esque CGI bring it down a bit. But overall, Send Help is an entertaining film. The lead performances in this are excellent. The direction of the film, I think, is overall pretty good. It has a decent pace to it. It never gets boring. I just wasn't really sure what I thought of the finale, but overall, 7 out of 10. Send Help is entertaining. Right, Ghouls and Fiends, that is it for the horror reviews. We're going to very briefly just wrap up the show by talking a little bit about some of the films of Mr. Clive Barker. So Clive Barker is probably most well known for Hellraiser, which he directed, his adaptation of his own short story, well, novella, I should say, The Hellbound Heart. Born in October 5th, 1952, British writer, filmmaker, and visual artist. Most known for his series of short stories collectively named The Books of Blood. But what are some of the adaptations of his work that have occurred that you may or may not have seen? We're going to talk about 4 particular ones. So we're not talking Candyman, we're not talking Hellraiser. We're going to jump into The Midnight Meat Train. It's an adaptation of the short story of the same name. But the film is a 2008 horror starring Bradley Cooper, Leslie Bibb, and Vinnie Jones. Plot follows a photographer who attempts to track down a serial killer dubbed the Subway Butcher and discovers more than he bargained for under the streets. The title of the film sounds schlocky, right? I hadn't watched it initially at its release because I thought a Vinnie Jones horror film called Midnight Meat Train just sounds silly, But and also Bradley Cooper in a horror film, really? Yeah, actually, it's pretty good. The finale is a little bit weird, and I haven't read the short story it's based on, but I believe the short story does that finale a bit better. But overall, the finale isn't necessarily bad, because it's a way to explain how this can occur and why it's occurred for such a long time. Because essentially, there is a guy who runs a train, goes through the city every night, and people go missing. But what actually happens on that train is fucking brutal. It leads to some decent thriller-esque chase scenes, pretty good fight scenes in it. And it does have an absolutely batshit crazy finale as to what is actually going on. Will I recommend it? Yes. Where can you watch it? Now that is something I should probably actually check. Because if you like the sound of these things, you probably want to watch them. I hear the dogs going crazy downstairs. They want their dinner. It is available as part of 50-cent action, 7-day free trial, or you can renew for $3.99 a month, or is available to rent or buy on Prime. I don't know about Netflix or Tubi, but in terms of Prime adjacent channels, you can get a free trial if you want to watch it. Check it out on there. But Midnight Meat Train is well worth a go. And Vinnie Jones doesn't really talk in it. So, and it's got Ted Raimi. Who's always good at popping up in a horror film. One that I do think is underrated, even though there's probably a reason why it does fly under the radar, is The Plague. Clive Barker's The Plague, 2006 horror movie directed by Hal Masonberg, written by Masonberg and Teal Minton, produced by Clive Barker. The thing about this film, it does star the now late James Van Der Beek, very tragic news. The only thing that lets this film down is the ending is crap. So one day in 1983, every single child younger than the age of 9 simultaneously becomes catatonic. For the next 10 years, every child is born in the state of catatonia. During this state, the children experience seizures twice a day, which develops and maintains muscle mass. But then in 1993, all the children awaken simultaneously in a zombie-like state and begin pursuing, killing, and murdering all adults. Or attacking and murdering, because killing and murdering is the same thing. The children have both superhuman strength and some kind of collective intelligence. What one learns, they all learn. The things that were stood out to me is I remember watching this on the Sci-Fi Channel in the 2000s, And there's a particular moment during, I think, the moment when all of the kids wake up, and there's this huge attack scene, and it's really, really violent. And there's a particular moment when one of the characters falls down, and one of the zombie kids like trying to attack them, and they try to kick him away from the ground with their leg. You know, like if you're on your back, try and kick away. He grabs his foot and then just twists his whole leg round. And I just remember being like, whoa, okay, okay. You don't often see that in films. I know nowadays it's more common to see like the arm snaps and leg snaps. And I always sort of think, realistically, it can't be that easy to just break someone's limb. But in this, it made sense because they got superhuman strength, and it was also a showcase of okay, they're terrifying, these kids. I just remember it being quite an entertaining watch, but yeah, when I've looked back into it, because I haven't seen it for many years, I have noticed that yes, probably the reason why it has flown under a lot of radars is the ending. It's just abrupt. It just doesn't really explain anything, and it sort of just ends there and then. The Plague I can't see on Prime Video, available to rent or purchase. So, oh wait a minute, Clive Barker's The Plague. You can rent it for £3.32 or buy it for £7.59. Odd pricing, but it's on a discount. Yeah, I'd be tempted to rent it again one day. But then I know I'd get to the ending and be like, oh, God, let down. Moving on, Nightbreed. Now, Nightbreed has a huge cult following. And I do feel that I probably need to get around at some point to watching the director's cut, because I've seen this once on TV a while ago. It didn't make a huge amount of sense to me. Visually, it's very interesting. It has a great appearance from David Cronenberg with this really creepy visual as this psychiatrist that's actually a serial killer. But the overall story is quite interesting. It's basically about this city, Midian, which Midian I always think of Cradle of Filth, because they've got an album called Midian. It's a city under a cemetery where monsters live. And it's this hidden world within our world, but they're all creepy, terrifying looking creatures and creations. But actually, they're the good guys, you know, what I talked about earlier on with transmutation or underworld, whatever it's called. Yeah, this is done a bit better than that, but I understand that there's a director's cut and there's also the Cabal cut, which apparently are just much, much better, much more, you know, they make a hell of a lot more sense. So I haven't seen those ones. I've just seen the theatrical cut. It is entertaining, but they don't make a huge amount of sense, I'll be honest. And that is an adaptation of Clive Barker's 1988 novella Cabal. In terms of Clive Barker's books, I have got Books of Blood, volumes 1 to 3, and I think also volumes 4 to 6. Potentially 4 to 6 might be on my Kindle. One of them I've got physically hardback, the other one Kindle. And I've read a handful of the short stories, but I have read Hellbound Heart and I have read The Scarlet Gospels, which is the sequel to Hellbound Heart. They're both very, very good. So I'm not just a Clive Barker fan in terms of the cinema. Speaking of a film that I'm not a fan of, to wrap up the Clive Barker, and this one again has a cult following, but I watched this with high expectations and I just did not enjoy it at all. Raw Head Rex is a 1986 British fantasy horror film directed by George Pavlo from a screenplay by Clive Barker, based on his short story of the same name. The story originally appeared in Volume 3 of the Books of Blood series. Stars David Jukes, Kelly Piper, Niall Toybin, Cora Venus, Luli, and Donald McCann. It focuses on a monstrous pagan deity's bloody rampage through the Irish countryside, with the title alluding to the folklore monster Rawhead. Pavlov and Barker had previously worked together on Transmutations. This is uber violent and it doesn't hold anything back. There's a scene earlier on where it's like, oh, did he just off screen just off a kid? Like, that doesn't happen in films, or didn't, especially, you know, back in the 80s and 90s. Like, it's uber violent. It's weird as well. I'm pretty sure there's like a priest pissing scene involving Rawhead Rex, which I think got sent up a bit in Garth Marenghi's Dark Place in the Apes of Wrath episode. the thing that lets this film down is the makeup effects, because Rawhead Rex, this horrifying beast, has just basically a non-moving mask. It's this big monstrous thing which like bites and rips and tears and can't be stopped, but it looks ridiculous. I think if they'd have gone for a different sort of design, or a design in the face that could show a bit more than just this static look, then yeah, okay, it could have been entertaining. And maybe I need to give it a rewatch with less with less expectation. Um, but yeah, it's Rawhead himself, Rawhead Rex himself is oof boof. So from a slasher perspective, yes, well worth the watch. From a what does a killer look like perspective, terrible. And that is it for another edition of the Ministry of Horror. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe, share on whatever platform of choice you're using. You use. TikTok is continuing to build, so if you have TikTok, search Ministry of Horror on there. Instagram, I don't really do anything on Facebook, let's be honest. But check out the podcast, video podcast on YouTube. Check it out on Spotify Podcasts. It's available 24 hours earlier on Patreon. So if you want to support the show, we have a number of different tiers there with exclusive content, some early access, some exclusive to the Patreon tier memberships. There's also a free membership if you want to get my weekly, bi-weekly blogs. But yeah, no pressure, but if you want to support the channel, you can do on patreon.com/Ministry of Horror. That is it for another edition of the show. I'll catch you next week. I'm going to try and commit to doing it next week again. I don't have any parties on to plan for or help plan for. I didn't really do much, I'm going to be honest. So business as usual should resume finally. Goodbye.